the role of tonic immobility or dorsal vagal shutdown. Maybe talk a little bit about what tonic immobility or dorsal vagal shutdown is and how this state might be misinterpreted as ego death or surrender in psychedelic journeys.
The other word that I actually use for it more commonly is hypoarousal. So there's basically two modes of reactivity. And these modes of reactivity are basically adaptive protection responses that the nervous system has to keep itself safe. When we start to get to the edge of our window of tolerance, or the edge in which we feel safe, the edge in which we feel grounded, some people will kind of go into this kind of anxiety overwhelm mode, which is high energy, and then other people will go down into this dorsal shutdown, hypoarousal, which is more of it can either be a freeze, collapse, or some kind of withdrawal response. Again, this is the nervous system's way of protecting itself. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. This is actually one reason why I moved away from holotropic breathwork, which I did train with originally, because I noticed that it was so intense that it would blast people through their capacity, through their window of tolerance, and many people would go into these shutdown responses. They would be kind of checked out of their body. They might have profound insights, downloads, whatever it is, but they wouldn't actually be in their body. My belief, my understanding is that if we're not kind of present with our sensations as these things are happening, they're unlikely to integrate and rewire.
Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today's guest is Jonny Miller, nervous system whisperer, host of the Curiously Human podcast, and creator of Nervous System Mastery, a 5-week boot camp designed to help high performers cultivate calm, resilience, and embodied aliveness. Jonny's work lives at the intersection of somatic intelligence, stress physiology, and transformational growth, making him a fascinating voice in the emerging conversation around psychedelics, trauma resolution, and inner leadership. In this episode, we'll explore how nervous system regulation can be both a prerequisite and a result of deep psychedelic work. Jonny, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Paul.
So throughout your work, you've described your own experience with burnout as the catalyst for your journey into nervous system work. And I'm curious, as an opening question, how did psychedelics enter that story, and did they help or hinder your own nervous system work at first?
So I would say that actually the deeper catalyst into this work was personal loss and grief, and losing my fiancée at the time, and really not knowing how to grieve. I've been quite disconnected from my body, disconnected from my emotions. And I, very shortly after the memorial, I received an invitation to drink ayahuasca. And I was both absolutely terrified, having had, pretty minimal psychedelic experience before that, I would say. And there was actually maybe an even deeper fear in me that if I didn't figure out, and it's funny I use the word figure out, but if I didn't figure out how to grieve and how to feel through this, I was afraid of becoming this husk of a human being, in the way that you see people that have so much repressed emotion, and there's this lack of aliveness in them. And so I ended up sitting in this Aya ceremony in the UK, and it wasn't what I expected it to have been at all. It was actually a profoundly exquisite and beautiful and heart-opening experience. And yeah, and it also kind of, I would say, put a crack in my atheistic, rationalist, materialist worldview that I kind of held quite strongly as well, and really planted a seed and made very clear that the maps and models that I had for the world were just completely wrong. It was very humbling, and also very generative at the same time. And that kind of then started, I would say, 2 to 3 years of deep inner exploring and work, which I can go into, but that was the kind of inflection moment, or the first experience that I had.
And so before we dive deeper into that, the 5-week boot camp that you have is called Nervous System Mastery. And so I'd love if you could sort of set the frame for our listeners before we explore the intersection of that and psychedelics. How would you define nervous system mastery, specifically in the context of spiritual or psychedelic development?
Yeah. So I have a few ways that I define nervous system mastery. One of them is reducing the half-life of reactivity, which also allows us to live with more agency and more aliveness. More agency because we spend more of our time in a state in which we're able to be intentional, as opposed to these knee-jerk trigger reactions to something that is happening. And the specific skills, of which I think there's like 3 pillars that I think are very relevant to psychedelic work. The first is interoception, which is basically how aware of your embodied experience are you? How present to your unfolding inner landscape are you moment to moment? That's like if that's a 0 out of 10, the amount of like meaningful work you can do is somewhat limited. The second is self-regulation or nervous system capacity. And that I think of as essentially like how much intensity can your system hold without getting ungrounded, without checking out, without dissociating, without shutting down. Again, that is something that can be trained over time, increased, etc. And then the third, which is really fundamental to psychedelic work in particular, is emotional fluidity, which another way of saying that is to what degree can you welcome the full spectrum of your human experience? So any emotions from heartbreak to abandonment to shame to despair, to what degree can you welcome and move towards them versus protect, close down, and move away from? And so those 3 things I believe can be trained in a kind of safe environment without psychedelics. And the more skilled you are in those 3 areas, I believe the deeper you're able to go in something like the arena of psychedelics. And again, if you have a guide, which I always recommend people do, then the guides, in my view, they almost like add or loan nervous system capacity to allow you to go, even deeper, and kind of like they help you to level up in those 3 areas, so to speak.
And so for your own experience, right, this anecdote that you shared about ayahuasca and grief, when you look at those 3 pillars, interoception, nervous system capacity, and emotional fluidity, how did that first experience with ayahuasca, like which one of those 3 did you feel like it really helped to open up a pathway for and develop? And out of those 3, was there anyone in particular, whether it was interoception or capacity or emotional fluidity, that you felt you were already quite strong in at that point in time, and psychedelics were not necessarily an amplifier for or a catalyst for?
Yeah, interesting. So I think I've always had quite a high capacity, I would say. I think that I would say it probably opened me up most with the interoceptive piece, like increasing layers of sensitivity and attunement that were previous, almost like increasing the definition. Or another way that I like to describe this is like, if you imagine a chef who goes through culinary school, you're kind of like increasing your flavor palette over time. It's like increasing subtleties of flavor. I felt like, it wasn't just one experience, but like ultimately kind of 30 plus journeys that developed that more refined taste, let's say, over time. And also the emotional fluidity piece as well, and bringing up past experiences, emotions that I didn't realize that I'd kind of been blocking out or repressing and not feeling, and gradually having the courage or the courageous curiosity to welcome those in and integrate those and find the gifts that were inherent in them.
So to sort of deepen into that, something you've mentioned in the past is that nervous system resilience is oftentimes the bottleneck for many people's transformation. And I'm curious, as you've deepened in this work with psychedelics and with the nervous system, how might that bottleneck of nervous system resilience show up during or after a psychedelic journey?
Yeah. Well, a frame that I've been playing with recently is, I'll just share this and then we'll see where this goes. But I think of enlightenment, which is a big word, enlightenment or like nervous system mastery, as feeling fundamentally like you have a secure attachment with reality. So you feel a deep sense of embodied safety in life, in all areas of life. And what I've noticed in my own journey and with the clients that I work with is the greater safety is present, both internal embodied safety and also external safety, like set and setting, the deeper you're able to go. And so essentially the more you can do to create because we don't really do the transformations. I think that we almost like create the conditions for transformation to maybe occur. And I think a huge part of the conditions piece is like, to what degree does your nervous system feel safe in this environment? And then to what degree can you then carry that sense of safety out into your daily life and integrate that?
Yeah, this sense of safety is a really important one, because the capacity to feel safe allows for, I believe, emotional fluidity, right? It allows for us to experience and feel the depth of emotion that wants to move through, because there's a sense of, in a way, a sense of calm that comes with safety. And yet a lot of people who come into psychedelic work because of trauma, or whether that's acute trauma or whether that's, childhood trauma. And so I'm curious, from your lens, before someone is even getting into deep psychedelic work, what are some fundamental practices as it relates to the nervous system that they can start to integrate and incorporate to create that sense and feeling of safety before they journey with ayahuasca or 5-MeO or, psilocybin or whatever the medicine is of choice?
Yeah. So before I answer that, I just want to like double click on this idea that safety often doesn't look like calm on the outside. Often safety creates the conditions for intensity to arise that didn't feel safe to come up previously. So you see this a lot with kids, where like they will be pretty calm at school, and then when they get home, they feel safe around their parents, and they act out, they get angry, they freak out, and it's because they feel safe around the parents. Like, let those things move and not have them like have a lid on them. So I think that's like an important distinction to make, that actually an increase in safety might, in the short term at least, lead to more things surfacing, and it actually looks more chaotic on the surface. So I think that's an important thing. In terms of how to create a deeper sense of safety, I mean, that really is, I think it's the most important question. I think it really helps to have it modeled to you, for sure. We are also, there's this quote that like, we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. I believe that we're also the average of like the 5 nervous systems that we spend the most time with. And so we will attune to the people around us. That's a piece. But there's also a lot of work that you can do on your own, in your own time, to increase. And I think it starts with interoception. It starts with noticing the somatic physical signs of lack of safety. And noticing what that's like when it's a 2 out of 10, when it's a 5 out of 10, and when it's a 10 out of 10, you obviously know. But if you can notice when it's like a 2 or 3 out of 10, like maybe your toes curl, or your stomach gets a little bit tighter, or your throat kind of starts to close, or your mouth gets dry. There's all these kind of things you can track. And so learning how to have that kind of inner compass of like, what do these different degrees of safety look and feel like in my body for yourself? That's the first point. And then the second piece is using bottom-up practices, specifically the breath, I think, to send signals from the body to the brain that the body is safe. On a very basic level, this can just look like an extended exhale. The exhale is twice as long as the inhale. That will create a relaxing parasympathetic response. There's various things so I also trained as a freediver. And What's interesting about freediving is it's almost like competitive relaxation. Like the more relaxed you get, the deeper you can go down underwater. And so it's a very good training ground, because the depth that you get is almost like a great reflection for like, how relaxed and in tune are you? And so there are these practices where you'll kind of take a breath out, you'll kind of like equalize, which also relaxes the system. And then there's various different down regulation practices, things from long hold stretches, like yin yoga is really good. And there's also kind of environmental pieces that you can change. So obvious things like might be relaxing music that you like, or the lighting conditions are a stimulus. And so kind of noticing how your stimuli are kind of impacting your body. So there's many different things, and I'm not someone that's like, just do this one thing. I'm like, have a toolkit, have a stack of different practices that you can combine, and just know when is appropriate to use different practices. But in the context of a journey, I think the breath is really the main thing that can be the brake or the accelerator for a journey. Like on a very fundamental level, bigger, intense inhale equals more activating, more energy, more intensity. Like big, like a sigh, like a sometimes with some sound, like that will very quickly downshift. And if I'm working with someone one-on-one in a breathwork journey and they're going outside their window of tolerance, it looks like they're about to kind of like, if it's too intense, I will just help them. I'll sometimes do it with them. I'll just like, and especially breathing into the belly. If I place some pressure on the belly, you can even do this with a stone or like a weight on your belly if you're by yourself. Like breathe out and then just let the lungs and diaphragm push the air out. And that's the most effective like brake on the nervous system that I've found.
Yeah, I do love this metaphor of free diving, because oftentimes when we work with psychedelics, it is this metaphor of diving deep into our own consciousness, and sometimes the consciousness of things outside of us, like transpersonally. And so this sense of, again, it comes back to safety and relaxation or calm. Where if there is more, like I often talk about psychedelics as a skill. So if there's a more skillful way that you can navigate the psychedelic landscape, there's a capacity to go much deeper, because I think there's a sense felt of trust in knowing that no matter what may come up, the deeper you go, you're able to breathe through it and navigate it and explore it without becoming overwhelmed or disassociated or, getting out of your body, things like this. So I love that notion of free diving, and the sort of maverick in me also wonders how low dose psychedelic work might help to support free diving. Do you have any experience with combining kind of these? I know you're quite a surfer as well, combining these low doses of psychedelics, like microdosing, with more extreme water activities. And have you noticed any shift or change in the subjective experience if in, let's say, a slightly altered state of consciousness?
Yeah, interesting. So I have with mushrooms and surfing.
Okay.
What came to mind was when I was out there, a snake, like a sea snake, came on my board whilst I was microdosing, and I freaked out. And to this day, I don't know if it was I think it was a real snake, but like, obviously I have no proof of that. I haven't combined it with freediving, partly just out of a kind of respect for the dangers that are inherent in freediving, and just a want to kind of keep that clean. The same way, I also don't experiment with breathwork and psychedelics, again, just because I kind of like to keep them separate generally.
Why is
Although
that?
I obviously do use the breath during solo psychedelic journeys myself.
Yeah, tell us more about that. Why is it that you're hesitant to combine the two? I've heard similar things from other breathwork practitioners, because the breath can be so powerful. But for someone as experienced as you, I would imagine that would be sort of kind of right up your alley. So talk to us a little bit about why that sort of boundary there between the two.
Like loosely put, so I'd almost view the breathwork as like an inherent amplifier. So let's say you take like, I know, a gram of mushrooms or something. If you do breathwork, that experience might be like 6 to 7 grams to some degree, like depending on how it goes. I guess that I've just seen them as like individual practices. And, now I probably would be more open to some experimentation, but I don't necessarily see the need. I don't really know what the benefit would be. And I've sort of like, I'd say I've been exploring different substances like over the years. Like initially it was Aya, and then mushrooms for a while, and then just breathwork with really no substances for a good period of time. And then Aya for a long duration. And then more recently, ketamine assisted bodywork, which has also been very deep and profound. And I feel, and there was a period where MDMA was also extremely helpful and beneficial, and just like unlocked new places in me. So I guess I more just like tune is like what I'm drawn to, and there's not really so much of a reason behind it.
Have you noticed any overlap between different psychedelic medicines and these three pillars? So, ayahuasca being better
Mm.
for interoception, or
Mm-hmm.
MDMA being better for nervous system capacity, or
Mm.
psilocybin being better for emotional fluidity. Have you given any thought to this sort of mapping on?
That's such a great question. I've never thought about that inherently, but I think I do have some. Yeah, like I would say pretty clearly, MDMA, I would say, is vastly increases and amplifies the capacity piece. Like I feel like MDMA, you like almost like anything can come up and you can hold it with a sense of like loving awareness and presence. With ketamine, I would say it actually was more the interoceptive piece, weirdly, that I was able to like, because there was such a place of stillness, like not quite in the void, but still like in the body, but like on the edge, where there was this like incredibly subtle attunement that I was able to access. And I think that's why I've been exploring that more recently. I would say that Aya for me has been much more about the transpersonal piece and less about healing my own things, but more, yeah, exploring the transpersonal stuff. And mushrooms are just weird and wonderful and interesting. And like, I don't know that it's necessarily about healing, but it's just like, oh my God, like what a gloriously magnificent world we live in.
Yeah, they're funky.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are very funky. There was another question that was coming up. This sense of the relationship between the nervous system and transpersonal experiences. Because when we think of transpersonal experiences, we think of them as being these experiences outside of the individual self.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, in your own work or the experience of work that you've navigated with the clients with psychedelics or even with certain forms of breath work. I mean, Stan Grof sort of reinvented holotropic breath work to facilitate these transpersonal states. So it's not just specific to psychedelics. But what have you noticed about this relationship between nervous system mastery, or the capacity to really be in our body, and the ability to surf and experience these transpersonal states of being?
Yeah. I mean, so I can only really speak from my own direct experience in this. It's not like a data-driven, like clinically researched thing. But what I've noticed in myself is the transpersonal experiences started to open up more once I'd done like a certain amount of like personal excavation. I almost imagine like a kinked hose, or the hose is like clogged. Like once like some degree of like my personal stuff had been unclogged, it like opened up to just more transpersonal, maybe like ancestral things, with some personal things coming through. And I think it partly also depends on the dose or the intensity. So like if let's say like a more intense breath work or a higher dose of some psychedelic has a higher likelihood of putting me more into the transpersonal archetypal spaces, versus the lower, more micro doses keep me more in the in like my own kind of this space, so to speak. I don't really have a theory as to why. That just seems to be, and that kind of tracks with what I've heard from friends as well. Yeah.
So I'm going to bring in a technical phrase, which you may have to describe before we get into to the question itself. But the role of tonic immobility, or dorsal vagal shutdown. So maybe talk a little bit about what tonic immobility or dorsal vagal shutdown is, and how this state might be misinterpreted as ego death or surrender in psychedelic journeys.
Yeah, great question. So the other word that I actually use for it more commonly is hypoarousal. So there's basically two modes of reactivity, and these modes of reactivity are basically adaptive protection responses that the nervous system has to keep itself safe. So when we start to get to the edge of our like window of tolerance, or like the edge in which we feel safe, the edge in which we feel grounded, some people will kind of go into this kind of anxiety, overwhelm mode, which is like high energy. And then other people will go down into this dorsal shutdown, hypoarousal, which is more of like, it can either be a freeze, collapse, or some kind of withdrawal response. And again, this is the nervous system's way of protecting itself. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. But what I've noticed, this is actually one reason why I moved away from holotropic breathwork, which I did train with originally, because I noticed that it was so intense that it would blast people through their capacity, through their window of tolerance. And many people would go into these shutdown responses. They would be kind of checked out of their body. They might have profound insights, downloads, whatever it is, but they wouldn't actually be in their body. And as like my belief, my understanding is that if we're not kind of present with our sensations as these things are happening, they're unlikely to integrate and rewire and kind of change over the long term. And so what I think is actually pretty common for people, especially people taking larger doses of things, or people who have a not much capacity, like a low window of tolerance, is it's very easy for them to kind of check out. And part of my job as a practitioner, honestly, is like looking for where people are at and keeping people on the edge, because that's where the stuff surfaces. But you don't want to push people outside, because then they will shut down, dissociate, potentially even re-traumatize in some cases. So yeah, it's definitely something that I wish like more people were aware of as well.
Yeah, it's like you have to find the middle way, so to say, right? Like there's a dance with it, and I've seen, especially with 5-MeO, a sort of propensity to blast someone out, like you talked about with holotropic breath work, which in sort of parts work terminology means they're just sort of blasting through the scaffolding of what's protected their psyche or their sense of self. And it can often be overly disorienting or destabilizing, to the point where you said, you even mentioned like re-traumatization can happen. And so I'm curious, how you assess this in client work, because a lot of folks who listen to this podcast are practitioners, coaches, doctors, clinicians. They're doing one-to-one work or group work. So when working with a client, how do you assess sort of where their nervous system is at and what might be an appropriate like onboarding ramp into these deeper altered states in such a way that it presses that edge but doesn't, push them too deep into hypoarousal or too deep into, destabilization and sort of disorientation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, in the modality I'm trained in, which is FBR, facilitated breath repatterning breathwork, we are trained to read someone's breathing pattern. And you can usually tell when someone is close to the edge. You can certainly tell once they've gone into dorsal, they'll stop breathing. Sometimes they'll stop breathing for long enough that their lips start to turn blue.
Oh, wow.
And so it's like, okay, that person obviously went too far. And you can start to see the signs of like, okay, someone's like maybe they're breathing in a certain way for a long period of time, and it feels like they're like resisting something. And at some point, something will just, it's like a fuse switch. It's like too much electricity is in the system, and then the fuse just goes. And you'll never know exactly when it's going to happen, but you can kind of tell when it's close. I more and more kind of orient towards trusting the wisdom of the nervous system, and that kind of aiming for much, much lower doses of whether it's breath, whether it's whatever the substance is, and then allowing the nervous system to kind of guide itself from there. My view is if you create enough safety and attuned presence, then the work kind of does itself. It's less about the substance getting to the thing or pushing through. That to me, it just has like an increased risk. And I've had probably some of my most personally profound healing journeys without any substance at all, without any medicine, just really skillfully guided, somatic attuned work. And so I think, ideally you want to kind of train clients to be self-referential and to develop that skill and capacity for tracking and doing the inner work for themselves. And low-dose psychedelics can be very helpful in the beginning for kind of getting some of that increased awareness and attunement online. I think it's great, like almost like crutches in a way, but you really want to be training that skill. And yeah, I mean, I'm personally, I've done 5-MeO a few times, and each time I was sent to this kind of hell realm place. The only time that I've had I would say like a psychedelic experience that was negative, and took me some time to recalibrate to. And if I'd been someone who was, had less capacity, let's say, I could have been sent to quite a dark place. Like I had support, I had skills, I had tools, I could come back from that. But for me, it wasn't a positive experience at all. And I struggled to see the benefit of just blasting up on that rocket ship so intensely and coming down so quickly. So I would be very hesitant except for anyone who just wants to have like a good time. But if someone's going in with like an intention for healing, then I personally wouldn't recommend that as an approach.
Well, and there's a subgroup of psychedelic practitioners that are now doing titrated 5-MeO-DMT pen work.
That's different, I think. Yeah,
right.
That feels different to me.
Which allows for that attunement. It allows for an individual to move at sort of the pace of their nervous system and what it allows. It's often combined with IFS
with
or different type of parts work. Yeah. Right. And I think what you're pointing to is there's this sort of groundwork that needs to be laid before we are traversing the sort of transcendent states that psychedelics often provide. And so my sort of follow-up question to you would be, a lot of people, for better or worse, they do come into psychedelic work first, and it is then an opening into breath work or meditation, right? We see this again and again and again. So I'm curious if someone does have a client that maybe previously worked with another practitioner and they were totally blown out and they're having a hard time stabilizing and orienting. What are maybe some practices that can be woven in, the week after, the month after, even a few months after a destabilizing psychedelic experience that can help someone to come back into their nervous system and sort of re-regulate and find ground once again?
Yeah, great question. So I would say practices which allow you to get back into your senses. So walking in nature and like really bringing presence to your feet, like your feet on the ground, that can be super helpful. Practices which like expanding awareness as well, I also find to be, there's something called the Alexander technique where you can kind of like train your awareness to notice when you're contracted and when you're kind of like expanded. And by practicing expanding your awareness, that also creates a sense of like ease and relaxation. And then probably the most helpful for someone in that position, I would say, would actually be NSDR or non-sleep deep rest or yoga nidra. Because and people can search. I've done some recordings on YouTube. Ali Boothroyd is a fantastic practitioner. She has dozens of free NSDR recordings. These are anywhere between 15 to 45 minutes. And they're essentially guided body scans that are inherently relaxing, get you into your body, get you into your senses, and they feel very replenishing and rejuvenating. So the simplest thing would just be listen to Ali Boothroyd NSDR practices on repeat and combine that with some kind of social connection and co-regulation as well. That can also be a really important piece.
Can you talk more about that? What is this role of relational health or social relational health in the nervous system and helping the nervous system to center and attune and be with whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that I've been like appreciating more and more in recent years, that I think there are limits to like how much work, for lack of a better word, we can do on our own. And that attuned humans are, because often these wounds that we receive, these ways that we learn that we were fundamentally unsafe, happened in relationship. And so many times they have to be healed in relationship as well. And there's a way in which, and most people can feel it, like when you come into the room or you make eye contact with someone who is grounded, you feel that sense of safety. There's like, your body will respond. Maybe your shoulders drop. Maybe like, maybe your breath is deeper. Maybe your presence is like more kind of down in your belly area. And there's like, okay, it feels good to be around those types of people. The reason that this is challenging is we live in a world which is somewhat, unfortunately, absent of grounded nervous systems. And so this is why we have the therapeutic industry where we pay people for hopefully access to a period of time. Maybe it's like an hour or two, a week or two, where you get to experience that and your nervous system gets to recalibrate to someone else who is grounded, present, attuned, not judgmental, reflects back what they see and hear. And I think that is it's essential, honestly. I think it's necessary. And hopefully there's ways in which you can receive it outside of transactional situation. Maybe it's like a men's group, women's group, deep friendships, deep family connections, things like that. But it's a form of nourishment, and we are social beings. Our nervous systems are designed to be social. We're very good at tracking cues and things, and I think many people have. It's just impoverished kind of like social circles and relationships. And the other thing is that like the more stuff we have, the more latches, the more trauma, the harder genuine intimacy is. So it's almost like this kind of vicious circle where like if you're someone who has a lot of a kind of trauma in your background, it's actually going to be harder to receive that intimacy or safety or connection from someone else.
And the tie that I'll make now is, the 5-week boot camp that you've pioneered, this nervous system mastery. It I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it appeals to a lot of high performers in tech in particular. And, one thought and consideration that I've given a lot of reflection to as a CEO and an entrepreneur and, quote unquote leader is it can often be difficult to feel heard, seen, loved. And in fact, that's often the motive behind ambition and high performance. So I'm curious, as you've done these boot camps and cultivated a community of individuals who are both high performers and also sort of growing out of that identity to some degree, what have you noticed is most helpful or beneficial for those in a leadership position or who are ambitious to help them come into that relational quality once again in that sort of nervous system health? What have you noticed and observed as sort of patterns that seem to be useful in that context?
Yeah. There's a few things. I think one of them is actually just building on that relational piece is like a sense of community, of like meeting other people who feel similarly, and there's a sense of like, oh, I'm like not so alone, and they can connect. Maybe they have businesses of similar sizes or whatever it is, but there's that way they can connect in the beginning. I'd say the number one thing that's most helpful for a lot of these kind of overachieving folks, which I put myself in that category as well. I was a startup founder for a long time. I still am. I have overachieving tendencies, I would say, but learning how to downshift, I think, is the most important thing. Not the most important, but is something that these people struggle with a lot. Like they'll be working till like 10, 11 at night. They'll struggle to sleep. They'll be kind of go for a period of time, and then a burnout, and then recover, and then the same thing kind of repeats. And so learning how to giving themselves permission to actually rest and recover is a big thing. Creating an inherent sense of value beyond how useful they are is also something that I see. And on some of the deeper one-on-one pieces, often there's a sense of like, there's actually an underlying fear of helplessness that is driving a lot of this for people. And by welcoming that helplessness to some degree, it kind of actually creates a sense of freedom, and there's less striving or less of a need to be perpetually useful, which is I think some of what is fueling this inability to kind of downshift, to connect and to like relax and truly switch off, which a lot of people, particularly founders, I think really struggle with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And for me, what's always been helpful is sauna and cold plunge, like contrast therapy has been huge. A men's group, which is run by a mutual friend of ours that I've joined in the last 4 or 5 months. It's also been really helpful in repatterning some of these relational dynamics, and then taking weekends off for the most part,
What do you do with your weekends? Like what does that look like?
Usually, I have a road bike, so I might go for a bike ride, farmer's market. I live in San Diego, so time at the beach if the weather is nice. Like dinners with friends, maybe the gym, or yoga, like some sort of active practice. During the week, I'll meditate for maybe 15, 20 minutes in the morning. So if I can have a longer sit on the weekends, that's always welcome. and allowing myself to sleep in a little bit more. During the week, I usually get up at 6 a.m. And so on weekends, I may sleep in till 7 or 7:30. Just, there's been this power in allowing myself to rest and relax. And for our work at Third Wave, also anchoring in the fact that like, it doesn't all have to get done now. I think this is also a challenge with high performers is this sense of I need to build something fast and intensely because I want to make a lot of money or I want to be successful or I want to help a lot of people. But it's often a 5 to 6 to 7 year plan. Like the typical startup journey is, can you exit in 7 years? Whereas I think this lens of what if I could find work that's so meaningful that I would want to sort of be in that craft for 40 or 50 years. And I think that attitude of longevity as well allows for a sort of lens of, okay, I don't have to do everything and get everything done. There is this sort of emergence that I can be part of when I'm doing this work.
Yeah, beautiful. And the thing that I'll add to that as well is this idea of like switching the fuel source. So I think a lot of people, especially in the beginning, ambitious people are generally driven by something that is maybe like to prove that they're great or something around like, I want to be seen by the world. Often there's this fuel which has a lot of energy, but if it's like a dirty fuel, it becomes toxic over the long run. And so trying to swap that out for where is my genuine like aliveness, stoke, excitement, creativity, like what am I being drawn towards? And in my experience, that fuel is actually can be more powerful. And a lot of people I think are afraid that if they start doing like, a 30-minute NSDR practice during the day, they're like, oh, I'll lose my edge or I'll be less effective. And sometimes, there is, I think that it's fair to say there is like a transitionary period. Maybe it's like a few weeks or a few months, depending on how much burnout there kind of is in the system. But once that fuel source switches, you almost get to be driven by like joy and creativity and like what do I want to do? Like, where is my enjoyment and excitement taking me? And that, particularly if you're in a position of leadership, like that is such a better place to be coming from. And it's also one that you would want to keep doing for 40, 50 years. Like this guy, Fred, that we were talking about before we hit record, like he doesn't want to retire. He's in his late 70s and he's trying to retire and he can't retire because he's just like really good and loves what he does. And so that's what I want to kind of orient towards in my life as well.
Yeah, I had a coach that I worked with once who would describe it like the need for a clean energy source is the difference between like a Tesla and like a diesel truck, where oftentimes we try in this sort of vessel of ours, which is really beautiful and magical. We try to put diesel into that rather than running off of something that's much cleaner. And in the case of a Tesla, that would be electric energy, obviously. And so that's always been a really helpful metaphor to anchor in. Like, is my energy, is what I'm running off of clean? Does it come from what David Hawkins would refer to as these higher states of consciousness or these higher level emotions? Or is it driven by anger, fear, maybe grief, even desire is what Hawkins talks about as a lower level emotion. Like the more that we can bring in the sort of joy of creativity, the more alignment and sort of capacity we have to channel the muse, if you will. That's a really common phrase. I find oftentimes the biggest challenge is just the question of what. In many ways, it's like, well, I would love to, like I hear a lot of people talk about, I'd love to find my purpose, but I don't know what it is. And it almost feels like this work with the nervous system, the interoception and the nervous system capacity and the emotional fluidity, when the nervous system is really healthy and vibrant and alive, we have this capacity to be more still. And through that stillness comes the awareness or the insight as to what we really genuinely love to create and build and do.
Maybe this will take us full circle, but that actually reminded me of my very first, the Aya journey that I mentioned, my very first psychedelic experience. And I kind of came in with that question of like meaning, like what is the meaning of all of this? Like why? And I had this moment where I was like visualizing this murmuration of starlings in the journey. And it was the sense of like, it was like, of course. And like the question from that state of being, the question of like, what is the meaning? What is the purpose? It felt absurd. It was like the question itself is ridiculous. And the insight that I've had that I think is actually very relevant to this conversation is that meaning, it's not an abstract thing to be figured out. It's like a literal embodied felt sense experience, which is where the nervous system work, the interoception, the emotional fluidity, like that allows us to have the sense of like intrinsic meaningfulness in everything that we do. It's not about a 5-year impact mission or vision that we have. It's actually something that we need to feel in our bodies. And that I think is a really just like, I wish that I'd known that flip when I was in my startup world, because I was chasing impact and meaning like outside externally in an abstract way. It wasn't something that I felt in my body. And I have much more of that now. And I'm infinitely more content and happy in my current state. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this balance between the world really needs your gift, and so bring it to the best of your ability, and don't be shy or hesitant to be amplified in that way and have massive impact, and the balance of what is it like to feel joy and contentment and presence. And I find the deeper personal work that I do and relational work that I do and even nervous system work that I do, the more that I veer towards that sense of joy and contentment and presence, and veer away from, as you mentioned, this sort of abstraction of, well, if I am only this successful, or if I only have this impact, then I'll be happy, or then I'll be content, or then life will be worth living. And it ends up becoming this sort of goalpost that just keeps shifting down the field, if you will. There's really never the capacity to be with it. And I think that's a lot because it's very intellectual. It's very sort of neck up, if you will. And at least for a lot of high performing men, this capacity to be in the nervous system and in the body and embodied with our work is where our real gifts and power come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's a way in which it's like feeling into it right now. Finding that fundamental like trust in life, and like fully trusting life and fully trusting yourself, and then like what wants to happen from there. It's like not for any reasons. It's not for any outcome. It's not like for some XYZ. It's just like when you fully trust yourself and you fully trust life, like what unfolds from that place. And I think that's the place that I try and return to and come back to. And of course I forget a lot of the time, and then I try and remember again. And that's why I have practices and friends and peers and people to keep me in that space. But that's the work that I'm trying to do for myself.
So just to close the conversation, and kind of on that note, what is it that you're creating, building, working on that you're really excited about right now? What is in your world? I mean, we've talked about nervous system mastery, which we'll point people to. You have a great podcast as well, but are there any things that aren't as public, or anything that are more, any creative projects that you're really, excited about right now, or you want to bring out into the world? What's really lighting your fire on a personal level right now?
Yeah, I would say on a personal level, writing more poetry and designing. I'm designing a physical card deck called Calm Cards that has been very rewarding. Like creating something like that I can hold as opposed to just like with pixels, and that's been really rewarding. And then really the big thing is preparing for fatherhood, hopefully, and looking to start a family, looking to join a community down in Costa Rica, and create the foundations for like new life. I mean, that I think that's the thing that I'm both like deeply excited for, and I think will also be an adventure in itself.
Beautifully said. Well, Jonny Miller, Nervous System Mastery, Curious Humans is the podcast. URLs or places that we can point people if they want to learn more about nervous system mastery, the 5-week boot camp, or the podcast, or even just your work, whether that's one-to-one coaching or facilitation or whatever else you're up to?
Yeah, great. I mean, the best place is nsmastery.com. There's information about the 5-week cohort. The next one is in the fall, in autumn. And there's also links to the Calm Cards deck, to the State Shift app, which is another kind of iOS, Android app for people that want to kind of access some of these self-regulation practices that we've built. And I think there's a link to the retreat there as well. So yeah, nsmastery.com is the best place.
Beautiful. nsmastery.com. Jonny's also quite active on X, formerly called Twitter, and has some really good takes there. And so reach out to him. Check out nsmastery.com, the 5-week nervous system mastery bootcamp, and let him know what you think of it. And Jonny, I just appreciate you coming on the show. I wish we could go longer. There's probably like a lot more to unpack, but this feels like a really good opening, technical enough, but not too technical for our audience, about nervous system, what it is to be in our nervous system, how that relates to psychedelic work. So I appreciate you joining us today for the show.
Thank you so much. This has been super fun.
Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. The psychedelic space is evolving every day, and we have a ton of amazing content that's coming out, and subscribing is the best way to keep up to date with all of that great content.